All right, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you are here for the Rising Generation, Peacemakers through Pluralism, Equipping the Rising Generation track, you are in the right place. My name is Brady, Earley. I'll be moderating. I'm just going to briefly introduce our panelists and then give them a chance to be able to respond to some questions, discuss with one another, and then we're hopeful that you'll also have some questions that you can be thinking about, and we'll have some time to discuss those later on in this breakout session. So first, immediately to my left, to your right, is Noah Silverman. He is the Vice President of Strategic Communications for Interfaith America. Sitting next to him is Paul Lambert. Paul is the Religion Initiative Director at the Wheatley Institute. And then we have Chad Webb, who is the Administrator for Seminaries and Institutes of Religion at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So this panel is going to be focused on really equipping, I think, is one of the key words here, some practical and concrete things that we can do to help build the capacity of the rising generation, something that was talked about in the last session with Southern Virginia University. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to first start by just introducing the organizations that they work with and talk a little bit about the foundational frameworks and principles and how those relate to creating tools for peacemakers in a pluralistic society. So we'll go ahead and start with Noah.
Great, thank you, Brady. Everyone can hear me okay? So as Brady said, my name is Noah Silverman. It's a real blessing to be with you all here and at this event. I feel like my brain is already buzzing with lots and lots of brilliant seeds of thought and questions. I work for an organization called Interfaith America. We are based in Chicago. It was originally founded as Interfaith Youth Corps about 20 plus years ago, when a group of young people who had all sort of grown up in the in the diversity service learning movement of the 90s sort of noticed that there were lots of spaces where they could talk about diversity and service, and there were lots of places where they could talk about service and faith, and there are lots of places where they could talk about faith and diversity, but there wasn't really a place where they could talk about all three. And so what would it be like to create environments where people, particularly young people, could come together to talk, to enact their commitment to serving the community, and then to discuss what from their background, what from their identity calls them to do that. And that basic framework has been the guiding methodology of our work these past 20 years. It has changed numerous times, which I'll quickly go over, but the basic idea of bringing people from different backgrounds together to engage in a common project in service of a greater good, and then to reflect, what is it for me as a Jewish person, what is it for you as an LDS person, what is it for you as an atheist that calls you to do this work, and to share from that perspective. So we got started in Chicago. We were networking churches and synagogues and mosques, youth groups and gurdwaras, and then September 11th happened, and there was a lot more attention given to the interfaith movement, and we started branching out and doing a lot more national and international work. And then around 2008, we realized that we really wanted to focus on higher education. So for the majority of our history, for about a decade, we've been focused exclusively in higher ed, and really working soup to nuts with higher education institutions to think about what does it mean to embrace religious pluralism, to embrace religious diversity in the same way that many higher institutions have embraced other forms of diversity. So as I'm sure you're all aware, in a lot of higher ed, there's lots of discussion about race and gender and sexual orientation and class, but there's very, very, very little discussion about religious identity, despite the fact that for most of us, it's the most salient form of our identity. So a lot of what we were doing was working with administrations to help them think about what would it mean to engage religious diversity more proactively in their institutional mission. We did work with faculty to help develop courses in the study of interfaith. It's lots of great institutions, including this one, have really fabulous departments of theology or religious studies. It's a different thing to study the Quran and the Torah and the Bible than it is to study Muslims and Jews and Christians, and particularly what it is that enables them to cooperate. What are those conditions, and what are the conditions that makes it more difficult for them to get along? So we helped faculty in a number of disciplines sort of pursue that emerging interdisciplinary field of interfaith studies. And then, of course, we did a lot of work with students, both student religious groups, organizing interfaith councils, as well as interfaith leadership trainings. We have an annual training conference every summer in Chicago, where we train about 500 undergraduates in the skills of interfaith leadership. What does it mean to be fully committed to your own identity, however you understand it, and to engage warmly and hospitably and graciously with others? During the pandemic, we realized that there was a lot of discussion around how different racial groups were reacting to the vaccine, but there was very little conversation about how different religious groups were reacting to the vaccine. And so we partnered with an organization called PRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, to do the largest national polling on religious attitudes towards, toward the vaccine. And then we sort of not entirely knowing what we were doing, we went out and we trained over 1,000 what we called interfaith community health workers. So we trained people with the skills that they needed in order to engage their communities, religious and otherwise, in conversations about the vaccine. And as we've been hearing, or at least as we heard on the last panel and been hearing a lot, most of the way you train people to talk to other people is to train them to listen. So just go into your community, hear what people have to say, listen to their questions, listen to what concerns they have, and to the extent that they're open and willing to it, offer them information about access to get vaccinated, offer them information about where they can find other reliable information. One of the things that our research showed is that Americans are 4 times more likely to trust their religious leader than they are their doctor about their own personal health. So we really leaned into that in a lot of the networking we did. Coming out of that, we realized that higher education wasn't the only sector of American society that needed this work. So we were founded as Interfaith Youth Corps, which is probably why I'm on this panel. We kind of had to keep changing the definition of youth for however old we were as the founders. So Ibu Patel is the president and founder, and sort of like youth was however old Ibu is and younger, but then once we all hit our 40s, that wasn't working so well anymore. So we rebranded as Interfaith America a couple of years ago to celebrate our 20th anniversary, and we now work across a number of different sectors. So continuing to work in higher education, working in faith and health, we do corporate consulting for a number of companies, and then we also do what we call democracy initiatives. So really working with other organizations to think about, as we heard about this morning, how do we combat growing political and religious polarization in this country, and how do we strengthen the institutions that we need across government, private, and public sectors to enable this grand experiment to continue. So I'll pause there. Oh, I will say one more thing, which is the specific reason why I get to be here is because one of the great partnerships that we're involved in is in a partnership with the Wheatley Institute to develop a course for the institutes on peacemaking. So a number of my colleagues and Paul and a number of other colleagues have been working together on developing a course that will be piloted through LDS institutes on how to gain the skills of peacemaking, particularly from an LDS perspective. Yeah.
Afternoon, everybody. Almost afternoon. My name's Paul Lambert. I'm here with the Wheatley Institute, and we're really grateful to all of you for being here at this convening. It's just such a wonderful event every year, and we're grateful to be part of it with our friends at ICLARS. Let me kind of pick up and talk about some of the things we're trying to do at the Wheatley Institute to empower the rising generation to be peacemakers, to build pluralism, to advance religious freedom. Before I do that, if you already know Interfaith America, that's probably why you came here, is because you know the wonderful work that they're doing. And I just don't want to take an opportunity with the microphone without saying, please go find out about Interfaith America. You may have seen Noah mention the founder's name, Ibu Patel. You may recognize that name. Ibu's been putting out a lot of really phenomenal op-eds, some books over the past couple of years that are just so desperately needed right now that address peacemaking and how we can engage with each other across difference. And Interfaith America is just doing such wonderful work. And if you don't know them already, I'd really encourage you to please go find out more about them. And really grateful to have Noah here, and I'm really grateful to be here with Chad as well on this panel. And thank you, of course, Brady, for moderating. Let me just quickly mention a couple of things that we're doing at the Wheatley Institute, and then talk a little bit more about this collaboration that Noah teed up. But I want to be brief so that we can hopefully have a conversation and some moderated discussion and question and answer. I'll just cherry pick a couple of things that I think might be interesting to you. So obviously, being at BYU, we have at the Wheatley Institute, we really have a public-facing charge. We try and do a lot of public-facing thought leadership and convening and things like that. But we do have a charge internal to BYU, where we are asked to take the principles that we stand for, pluralism. Wheatley is pluralism, family, and constitutional government, and take those things into the curriculum across disciplines at BYU. And I'll just talk about one thing that we're doing at the Marriott School, where I also happen to have a faculty appointment. But we've taken the idea of pluralism and why pluralism matters in an economic or in a business environment and built that into the curriculum. So why does it matter in an economic or business environment, right? As we move into the workforce, as our students move into the workforce, they're going to encounter probably the most diverse place that they know or that they've experienced. Our students are not in the most diverse place at BYU for a variety of reasons, but especially religiously. But when they move into the workforce, they're going to encounter views, cultures, religions, all of the above in their day-to-day life. If we can understand the benefit of pluralism in that environment, they're well prepared to take that into their communities as well. And so we talk to the students about not just that they're going to enter into this diverse world, but we talk to them about that their faith identity, that pluralism is actually a great asset to them. And it's an asset to them in the context of BYU as disciples of Christ, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it's also an asset for their Jewish colleague or their Muslim colleague or their atheist colleague, that we need to empower others of their faiths. If we can create that pluralistic environment, not only is that going to be for them, good for them as individuals, but it's actually going to have positive benefits for their company. So we brought this into the curriculum across the Marriott School to help these students understand what it means to be a person of faith beyond a BYU environment or beyond a religious environment. And that's been a really exciting and empowering realization for these students, that they can be true to who they are as people of faith, and that supporting their colleagues of other faiths is also great for them and great for their businesses. So it's an all boats rise. My ability to live my faith can actually be a positive benefit on my colleagues' ability to live their faith. It's not a zero-sum game. So we've done a lot of different things in the Marriott School to do that. We started this about 1.5 years ago. 2 years ago, and we've now incorporated this into the curriculum and have taught over 2,000 students these principles. Another 1,600. It's part of the core or part of the required curriculum within the management communications program, the ethics program. So these are really exciting developments, bringing these concepts of peacemaking and pluralism that are now part of the curriculum. If you're a business student, you're going to get it in various different aspects of your BYU business school education. We've worked with other organizations. I'm going to talk about Interfaith America and our work with them in a moment. We've worked with Braver Angels. We're going to be bringing them onto campus to help us do one of their moderated debates. Hopefully you'll have a chance to hear about that. Unfortunately, I think the Braver Angels session is going on right now, so thanks for coming here, but sorry you missed that. But if you have a chance, find out about what they're doing. We've also been doing a lot of public-facing events where we've tried to bring in young people. We did a major event at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Now I can't remember what the date was, if that was this year or last year. It's kind of a blur, but we brought in, we did this actually in conjunction with the National Governors Association, which is currently chaired by the Governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, to talk about how to disagree better. And we had people across political difference and religious difference come together and show that they can be friends, that there are practical ways to disagree, and that there are ways that we can build relationships despite disagreement. We have a number of different student programs that we also run, but for time I won't go into all of those. But the principle that we're trying to follow is exactly what we've been hearing throughout the day so far. I mean, obviously at BYU, we are a school that's owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so we look to our leaders, our prophets, seers, and revelators, as we call them, our church leaders, for guidance. We look to our sacred text for guidance. And that guidance really is, how can we follow the example of Jesus Christ in being peacemakers, showing love to our neighbors even when we disagree, perhaps especially when we disagree. And so let me just end by taking a minute here to talk about what Noah raised, and that is a collaboration that we're working with them on, and the Institute, Church Institutes, Seminary Institutes, on a workshop that will focus on how do you be a peacemaker. So we've all been called, as within the church, we've all been called to be peacemakers. We can use to actually do that. And so there's some really great frameworks. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a little bit in our discussion today, that Interfaith America has. There's some wonderful frameworks that have been taught by some of the church leaders within our tradition, and we're taking those and putting those together and trying to empower, give tools, give words that our students can use across the Institute programs to then go into the world and be peacemakers in practical and meaningful ways. So maybe I'll end there. I think we'll have more to say on that as the conversation progresses, but I'll turn it over to Chad.
Thank you. So I'm Chad Webb. I work with Seminaries and Institutes of Religion for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For those of you who aren't aware of that program, we have about 400,000 high school age students, youth and seminary classes that meet virtually every day. And then on the more young adult group, the college age students, we have over 350,000 students worldwide. And they're primarily, or at least initially, were on college campuses or adjacent to college campuses to balance their academic pursuits with spiritual and religious studies. And those have spread now, so it's not just on college campuses. They also have in our young adult program institutes as part of their experience if they choose to participate. That's the number I gave you is kind of an annual enrollment over their course of maybe being 18 to 30. There's many more than that participate. They don't all participate every semester or every year, but the majority of those who attend church gatherings in the church will participate in Institute at some point at that time as they're young adults. We're a little bit the new kids on the block to this. We really appreciate what Interfaith America has been doing, what Wheatley and Paul has been doing, and they approached us asking if there was a way to get some of this information and experiences and skills that are being taught to BYU students for all of our young adults across the world. And we have a new thing in Institute. For years, we've been kind of a traditional semester-long model where we teach classes that mirror university experiences. What we've done the last couple of years, well, let me give you just a little context. We had been declining a little bit in our enrollments in Institute. And so we did some pretty rigorous study to find out what was happening, to meet the needs of young single adults, what they wanted Institute to be, and even, quite frankly, their experience in the church to be. And they came back, over 5,000 young people, 5 continents. We tried to really listen and understand. And they came back and said they wanted to feel a greater connection with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. They wanted to feel their love more consistently in their life. They wanted their experience in church and Institute to be more relevant in answering their questions and meeting their needs, not just teaching lessons. They wanted to feel a sense of belonging to each other with people that would help them with their goals spiritually to stay on what we would refer to as the covenant path, and also belonging to a cause that was greater than themselves, something important that they could be a part of. And they wanted it to be more accessible. So we gathered all of this together. We started to make plans, but we went back to young adults and said, what would that look like? And one of the things they asked for was, when I have a question, the teacher says, okay, come to my class, and somewhere in this 16 weeks, on week 14, the last 5 minutes, listen really closely, we might answer your question. And they said, we would rather just address our questions directly. So we've created workshops that are 2 to 5 week seminars addressing specifically issues that young people are interested in and not speaking around it or coming to it in the context of a lesson outline or a syllabus. And so these 2 to 5 week workshops are happening. They're on a number of topics. They've been really well received. We have a lot of young people coming, even that don't come to Institute, because here's a question I have and they're going to address it at the Institute. And this has been one that was suggested, and we have talked to a lot of young people, and they're very excited about this. They want I think you know this about this generation of young adults. They generally find this easy. They have great empathy for their peers. They care a lot about issues in the world. They want to be peacemakers. They just want to know how to talk about their faith in a way that builds peace and unity and empathy and not contention. And so this is a really good marriage for us, that they've built some things. It was just said, I'll give you, well, I think we'll probably get to this with some of the questions, but the principles of Interfaith America align really well with things that church leaders have taught. And Paul's done a good job to teach these principles from the language of church leaders and how they talk about building peace, and we can get to some of those things. But we're excited to do this. We're just getting started, but it's being really well received by our young adults. We're doing a number of other things, and maybe there's time to talk about these later. We've done some things with Standing Together Ministries. Here at BYU, they come, and then after they have a visit to BYU, they visit 4 different institutes where they engage with our students at our institutes in 4-hour sessions. They're here for 2 weeks, twice a year. And it's been a blessing not just to the people who come and visit, but for our institute students to listen to them and to share their own faith journey and experience. And I can share with you some specifics about that as well. So there's a number of things that are happening, but this is at the heart of it, and these new workshops are allowing us to do this. So that's probably where I would start.
Great, thank you, everyone. Obviously, as each panelist touched on, this new workshop is kind of what unites the work of all 3 of these organizations, and I won't restrain you anymore from being able to talk about it more, because I know that you're all eager to be able to share about it. So in whatever order you all want to address some of these questions about it, what is this course, this Peacemakers Institute workshop, going to look like in practice? What are the principles that will be behind it, and what are you hoping to achieve for student outcomes from this program? So whoever wants to start by addressing that.
Maybe I'll start, and then you want to talk about some of the frameworks that Interfaith America brings. So, just to put some really specific particulars on it. So this will be, as Chad went, a 5-week course. We're going to pilot this at the University of Utah, actually here, and assuming it goes well, we hope it does. Beyond that, it's called Peacemakers Needed. For those of you that are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will recognize that that's a direct reference to kind of a seminal address from President Nelson on this topic. But it builds on the teachings not only of President Nelson, but many other church leaders, in particular President Dallin H. Oaks is another that we build on, and those principles that are taught in those courses is really the foundation of that course. As the students are engaged with those, or as they learn about those principles, we couple those with, for example, practical scenarios, right? So we'll put them in, we'll give them a scenario to struggle with, and say, you're in this situation on your college campus. This ends up happening. What do you do, and how can you apply these different principles? One of the frameworks that we'll be talking about is actually, you heard it here first, by the way. We've taken the principles that President Oaks has talked about and made them into something called Act Like Christ. And what that stands for is act. The A is avoid contentious settings. Love others, find common ground. That's the C. So love others, find common ground. The T in act is hold the truth, even in our outreach to others. And then the L in like, and the C in Christ is the L, be a light to the world, and C is stay anchored in Christ. Now, these are 5 principles that President Oaks taught in an address he gave with Elder Clark Gilbert, who's the Commissioner of Education for the church, to young people at Ensign College, but was really for not just for the students there, but for the students throughout the church. And we're hoping that when students encounter these difficult situations, they can remember act like Christ, what those 5 principles are, and engage in those. So that's just one example, right, of the kind of things that we'll be talking to the students and putting them in scenarios and allowing them to practice these ideas in a setting that prepares them when they hit the real world and can do those in practice. Would you want to talk about some of the Interfaith America's frameworks that we're building on?
Hello. So this morning, for those of us who were there, we heard the speaker talk about Gordon Allport, who is the sort of founder of contact theory. No disrespect whatsoever, because that talk was amazing, but contact theory has actually evolved significantly since Gordon Allport's initial work. So what social scientists and behavioral scientists have discovered over the years is it's not enough just to put people from different identity backgrounds into contact with each other. That in of itself actually does not engender real transformation. You can think about how many different people maybe you interact with on an airplane, and does that really change your attitudes towards any of them? From a more religious perspective, Diana Eck, who's the founder of the Pluralism Project at Harvard, sort of built on this idea to talk about the difference between diversity and pluralism. That diversity, even though it's gotten a lot of attention, is really just a descriptive term for the fact of people from different religious backgrounds coexisting in a certain space. It doesn't really tell you a lot about what's going on in those interactions, though. So Gaza is a diverse place, Jerusalem is a diverse place, Belfast is a diverse place. What we're really interested in is what are the quality of the interactions amongst people in a diverse environment. And that's what Diana Eck at Harvard calls pluralism, which is sort of the proactive engagement, the positive engagement of diversity toward a positive end. And the social science corresponds with this. So what we found is that you need to have some sort of common project. You and these other people with whom you are in contact need to be working on something together. It doesn't really actually matter very much what that thing is, as long as it's something that all the groups have relatively equal access to and equal claim to. It's clear that it's going to benefit the whole group in equal ways. And then we actually found that that in of itself doesn't do it either. What's the third component is what's really needed is an acknowledgement of the diversity in the room. So you and I could work together to clean up a park or mow a lawn or whatever, but if we don't actually talk about how it is that I'm doing this from my perspective as a Jewish white man from Chicago and you're doing this from whatever perspective you're coming in, it doesn't actually change my attitudes towards you and your identity group. The really great news, though, is if we are able to introduce that third component in, research by David Campbell and Robert Putnam has shown that, and Ryan mentioned this morning, he talked about his friend Bob, sometimes it's called my pal Al, is the social theory, but that basically if you work with somebody on some common project that you're interested in and acknowledge in that relationship that you are coming from different backgrounds, the social science, the empirical research shows that your attitudes towards that entire identity group are likely to change drastically. So if and the actual example in the book is beekeeping, I don't know why, but that's the example that's used. So if I'm into beekeeping and I go to a beekeeping festival, I'm not a real beekeeper, with Brady, and I discover Brady's really interested in beekeeping too, and oh, isn't that so cool? And we get to be friends, and we're talking about beekeeping, and then I learned that Brady is LDS. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I used to think X, Y, and Z about LDS, but Brady here is this great guy, and he's into beekeeping like I'm into beekeeping, so I guess LDS folks aren't all that bad, and we can document, we can measure how my attitudes towards the LDS community will improve based on that. Now, here's the really remarkable thing. Attitudes towards all diversity start to change. There's a halo effect. So if you have one positive experience with somebody from a different identity group around a common issue, your attitudes towards diversity in general, your attitudes towards all other diversity groups are likely to go up. So even though I just did beekeeping with Brady, now all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, maybe there are Muslims who are cool beekeepers too, or maybe there are atheists who do cool beekeeping. I don't know. It's not really necessarily all that conscious, but that's what the social science teaches us. So at IA, the way we've built that into the frameworks that undergird our programs is it's really very simple. It's just three things. It's respect, relate, cooperate. How do you create environments, microenvironments like the one we're in now, where it is more likely for people to acknowledge and respect the identity of everybody else in the room, not to agree with it, not to condone it, but just to acknowledge it's as important to you as it is to me, right? I have my identity, you have yours, and you're entitled to it, and I'm entitled to mine. And then how do we relate to each other across that difference? So we need to build some sort of relationship. And again, that relationship needs to acknowledge the difference. It can't just be we're sweeping the fact that we're different under the carpet. It needs to be like, no, I'm Jewish and you're Muslim and we know that, but we both really like beekeeping. So that's what we're gonna do. And then the third piece is the cooperate, is there needs to be some sort of common action that folks are engaged in. So the skills that we teach at Interfaith America are really that simple. How do you teach in this case, young people, both that framework and then the skills that they need in order to create environments where that's more likely to happen. How do you build in your dorm room, in your place of work, in your family, in your wherever, conditions where it's more likely and people have an easier time respecting, relating, and cooperating. And that's the basis for of all the work that we do at IA. But then what we've been able to do in the curriculum with Wheatley and with the Institutes of Religion is to map that onto some LDS principles, including the ones that Paul just mentioned, they act like Christ. So it's been a really interesting integration. And I will say, though, it's probably less relevant for this audience, we do similar work like that with other traditions too. So a lot of what IA is engaged in is thinking about, okay, we know this from social science and from lots of places, and this is our main framework. What does this look like in a distinctly Jewish language? What does this look like in a distinctly Christian language? What does this look like in a distinctly Baha'i language? And making those connections and working with those denominations to facilitate that work.
Can I just say something really quick before I give it to Chad? One of the things that Interfaith America has been so good at and been frankly adamant on is recognizing that what we're creating here is going to be focused on an LDS audience. They've said, please take these principles and translate them into LDS vernacular. And that's really important, right? Now, these principles are not unique to my faith tradition or another faith tradition, but being able to speak the language of the students that we're focused on is really, really important. And then building. And empower them with.
I'll be brief so you can go to the next question. And this might even go without saying, but I had an experience a few weeks ago that made me want to say this. It's not just the vernacular, but it's the spirit of what we're trying to do. For me, this is not a political issue. It's not a social issue. It's at the heart of what we believe, that we're all children of God, that we're all alike unto God, that everyone should be treated with kindness and fairness and respect. And so we're really teaching love one another, respect one another, not an agenda that sometimes people confuse with what we're doing and feel like, well, why are you giving your microphone away to somebody else? We're couching this in principles that we believe in deeply and feel like we'll bless our students and bless the world. And we'd love this partnership because we're not the only ones trying to do this. But we're not doing it because of someone's agenda, but because we really believe these principles to be true. And we have a prophet who's asked us to be peacemakers. And we have President Oaks teaching us how to do that. And the students say, that's great, but when I'm confronted at school, what do I do? And so they get a chance to think about it and practice it and be with other people to have these experiences to help equip them to follow the principles that we believe in. So.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So with this new Institute program, as well as we could talk about more broadly the other programs in other faith traditions that Interfaith America has been a part of, what do you see are some of the unique circumstances and challenges specific to the rising generation as you're trying to implement this initiative and trying to see out these outcomes and goals of the program? Start, Noah.
Well, sure. So as you've all been reading in the newspaper every day, we're winning, and there's global peace is on the rise, and it's really just a matter of time until the kingdom of God arrives. No, I think, I mean, many other people have commented on this already today, and in far more intelligent ways than I'll be able to. But I think the most dangerous cultural trend in our society is towards ideological purity and the notion that even countenancing somebody else's beliefs or opinions or hearing them out is somehow a moral failure on your own part. And it runs contrary to pretty much everything. It runs contrary to my Jewish tradition. It runs contrary to my understanding of other people's traditions. It runs contrary to the concept of democracy and the democratic experiment. But it has really been hugely on the rise. What's noteworthy about it, though, is that I think a better way of understanding polarization is less that people's opinions are gravitating toward the polls, though that is what we were hearing this morning, and more that the polls are just getting a lot more of the airtime. So we work with an organization called More in Common that's done some research that showed that on the political divide, most of us hate the other side for things that they don't actually believe. So most Democrats despise Republicans for viewpoints that Republicans by and large don't hold. Most Republicans despise Democrats for viewpoints that by and large Democrats don't hold. So part of what we need to try and figure out how to do is to cut through the discourse of polarization and the sense that the sort of mantra of ideological purity, which actually in practice most of us don't really agree. And one of the things we have at IA is that it works a lot better in practice than it does in theory. Most of us actually know how to do this. We know how to have conversations with people across difference and to not be rude and not be a jerk and to try and hear other people out. And a lot of this is indeed, Monica Guzman has a great book called I Never Thought of It That Way, in which she argues, this is actually not that hard. Like there are frameworks and stuff that can help us think about how to do it, but it's really actually not that difficult. You don't need lots and lots and lots of training to learn how to do this. And most of us do know how to do it in certain contexts. We're just influenced by a cultural pattern that suggests we don't do it with religion or we don't do it with politics, we don't do it here. So I think that is both the challenge and the opportunity that we're facing, is that I think a lot of, not just young people, I think a lot of us want to be in respectful, curious, humble relationship with each other. I think that's our natural instincts. And I think that's what our values call us to. And yet there's a amorphous sense that somehow by doing that, we are betraying our deepest convictions when, of course, well, I don't believe that's true.
I think you said that really articulately. So yeah, better than I've heard. I would also say, a lot of the students that I engage with, at least, are really eager to do right to be a peacemaker. They're being told that they need to put an ideological identity first. That's the way they need to engage in the world, or they need to pick a side, or and that's one of the major challenges we have specific to the LDS context. We find often that our students, excuse me, and I'm going to overstate this, but we often find that our students feel like when they go out into a diverse world, they either need to convert everyone when they go out, or they feel like compelled to kind of put their religion over here and hope that no one asks them about it. Both not great choices when you're going into a workplace, for example. And what's been really exciting about these principles, these ideas, is that students, this is the framework that they feel allows them to be true to who they are, because and it also frees them to allow others to be true to who they are. So oftentimes we found our students feel like empowering their Jewish colleague, because that's different from their identity, is somehow in competition with their identity to be who they are. And this framework allows them to realize, no, actually, again, speaking in an LDS context, no, empowering my Jewish colleague is absolutely part of being a disciple of Christ. Empowering my Muslim colleague is absolutely part of being a disciple of Christ. I'm allowing them to be true to who they are, and I can create an environment for me to be true to who I am also as a disciple of Christ, and we create this pluralistic environment where they're benefiting individually, I'm benefiting individually, and we collectively are benefiting as a society, as a workplace, whatever it is. So that's some of the challenges that we've seen, and some of also the immediate benefits we're seeing as students are exposed to these concepts and principles.
All right, I have one more question for our panelists to discuss, and after that we'll turn to questions from you, so be thinking if you have a question. I think it looks like we have a mic in the back, so we will pass that around. The question that I wanted to ask before we jump to questions from the audience is you've talked about this in the context of like higher education, this workshop for students who are for seminaries and institutes, primarily going to be students, maybe some young professionals as well. What might this look like within a local community? How might they use and try and apply some of these principles and frameworks that you've been discussing? And how could they make this work within their context?
I'll go first and say I'm not sure. I think we're going to start here and, see how this goes, and it'll spread not just to the large campuses here in Utah, but across the world in our institute programs. If they then saw some value in this and wanted to say, let's have some other gatherings to teach similar principles, I suppose that would be up to local leaders, but we'll start with the group we have easy access to and try to make this as impactful as we can. So, is that fair?
Noah or Paul, anything to add?
I mean, from IA's perspective, again, it's this sort of tension between, on the one hand, it's not that complicated, and it is really difficult. And both those things, it's equally accessible to all of us to do, and it requires a lot of courage and fortitude, right? So we are gearing up for our annual training conference, as I mentioned earlier, in August in Chicago, bringing young people from all around the country together. And we are going to have people there who very vehemently believe that there's a genocide occurring in Gaza that is absolutely morally reprehensible, that needs to be stopped at all costs right now. And we have people who believe that the state of Israel is rightfully defending itself against terrorism and that it's a just war that needs to be defended at all costs. And we have people who probably haven't thought about it that much and don't care. And part of what we ask people to do is to come into that space and listen to each other. And it's that uncomplicated and that difficult. It's how do you listen to other people with humility and curiosity and seek to understand their perspectives. And in that sense, we can all do it everywhere. We can do it at our Thanksgiving table. We can do that in our places of work. We can do that anywhere. But it requires, again, not particular skills, but a particular mindset, intentionality, thank you, Samarine, and a particular willingness to be uncomfortable. I mean, it is a disquieting experience. I actually used to, this is more of an aside, but I used to be really offended when people tried to convince me to convert me until I actually learned more about evangelism. And then I got to this place where I was like really offended if people didn't try to convert me, because it was like, wait a minute, if I understand your beliefs correctly, why aren't you trying to save me? Don't you care about me? But that's exactly that transformation that I think we each need to do in our own way, is that we interpret, understandably, other people's intentions through our own moral and experiential frameworks. And the goal is to be in relationship long enough to understand that actually from where you're coming from, this is an act of love, right? And so let's do it. As Bob Robert said earlier, I'm not going to convert, but give it your best shot. I want to hear it because that shows me that you care. And so I think we all need a lot more of that. I mean, it's easy to say, but we all need a lot more of that humility and curiosity.
So when I'm lecturing about this in the context of students going into work, I often get a question that's not this question, but it kind of gets to the same point, and that is, well, how do I start this? How do I create an environment where I can be true to who I am? And inherent in that question is me first, right? And I understand that. We all want to be able to live true to who we are first, because that's who we are. But my answer to that is often go find a way to help someone else be true to who they are first. And then they'll help you. Then you'll have two people committed to the idea of creating an environment where you can both be true to who you are. That's a practical thing I think that we can do in any context, is let's focus on helping someone else be empowered with dignity first. And we'll find that environment benefits us as well. And as we gain converts, not to maybe faith traditions, but gain converts to this idea of pluralism and empowering each other with dignity, that's I think one person practical approach to building pluralism in any context that we have.
Go ahead. Well, I was just thinking of, Noah said this a minute ago, and it's been referred to a little bit, but I also think there's a step back from that and just the way we perceive others and perceive the world. And it's just a happier way to live. I'm going to refer again to a leader of the LDS Church, but I think even as we tune in our church, as we attune people to what's actually being taught by church leaders, this is 8 years ago. Dieter F. Uchtdorf in General Conference said, quote, reference this, as part of a study, researchers interviewed Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East and Republicans and Democrats in the United States. They discovered that each side felt that their own group was motivated by love more than hate. But when asked why their rival group was involved in the conflict, they pointed to hate as the other group's motivating factor. In other words, each group thought of themselves as the good guys, fair, kind, and truthful. By contrast, they saw their rivals as bad guys, uninformed, dishonest, and even evil. I just think it's a better way to live. Even taking a step back from the skills and abilities to communicate and listen, just to have a worldview where you see the good in people, where you think that their intent is positive, and when there's disagreements, they're honest and with good intent. I think as we assume good intent, we just live happier, more peaceful lives, even before we start to speak or act in the ways we do. It's just a better way to live. So anyway, I just was supporting what you said.
I'll work it into an answer to some of that question.
Okay, sounds great. So we'll turn the time over to you. Any questions? If you just want to raise your hand, and then we'll have Bryson with the mic. If you just want to take it to whoever you see first, and we'll just see how many we can get in.
First of all, thank you very much. I've gained a lot from this. My name is David Kirkham. I'm from the Geneva Office for Human Rights Education, and I'm a retired BYU professor. And I'm sitting here thinking of my fairly homogenous audience that I've had the time I was here at BYU. And I'm imagining different scenarios. One is I say to the class, let's talk about anti-Semitism. Because who knows, you might meet a Jewish person someday. It might be in 2 months, it might be in 2 years, it might be 20 years, but it's still a good thing to know. Another approach is, well, let's go out and find the Jewish community so that we actually get to interact with these people. Another approach might be, and I don't want to imply this is a better one, but another approach might be, well, let's talk about the Latin community, because they're all over the place. And you're going to have an opportunity every single day to interact with people from the Latin community. So I'm throwing this out as, it makes it sound like the third approach is the most practical and maybe it would bear the most fruits, and yet I still believe we need to talk about anti-Semitism. So I'm just going to throw this out to you and ask for a reaction rather than make this a specific question. And unless the question is really, so what are we talking about in terms of the practical approach to this that's going to bear some really, really profound, important fruits in the long term?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, well, let's gather a couple. I think that's a great idea. Got one over here.
Thank you. My name is Shonda McPherson, and I'm a doctoral student at Fuller Theological Seminary. And in my previous life, before I returned to school to be a doctoral student, one of the things that they would cause us to help us to embrace at work is assuming best intentions. And the thing about that is that while it is easy, it can be difficult, and you have to be intentional. And the reason for that is because in the United States, we are socialized to be individualistic in our worldview and in our way of thinking. And to think about somebody else before we think about ourselves really requires a sense of self-inspection so that you can see somebody else before you see yourself. I think another thing that I heard that I would probably give a little bit of pushback about is a skill set when in environments where there is a potential to be conflict, and that is that people think that they know how to do conflict resolution, but they really don't, and people are really bad at it. So the thing about that is that when you're in a situation where conflict is possible, it's important to be self-aware, because you need to be able to self-regulate when you hear things that you don't agree with. And that does require a certain skill set, but it's an individual skill set in a way that you need to be aware of your own body language, your own affect, the way your words come across, because all those things matter so that you can be heard when it's your turn to speak. And that's coming from the doctoral psychologist student in the room.
Can we get one more question, Bryson, and then we'll have the panelists respond to some of these thoughts.
Thanks. My name is Tim Stratford. I wear a number of hats, but I guess here I'll say that I'm General Counsel of the G20 Interfaith Forum. My question is this. Often when you're faced in a situation where you want to be a peacemaker, there's a tension with also your desire to stand up for what is right. So there's a tension between those two goals. And what are some principles you might apply to help navigate the tension between those two goals?
Great. Okay. So we've got on the table questions about differing approaches to peacemaking, talking about assuming best intentions and conflict resolution and how we do that, and then this tension between standing up for what is right and being able to talk about these principles of peacemaking. So I'll let you guys finish jotting down notes for a second, and then whoever wants to start. Paul, would you like to start? Okay.
Maybe I'll take a piece of this. So, and again, I hope I understood the comments and questions correctly, and you can correct me if I didn't. So, on David, taking on anti-Semitism, for example, yeah, I think we want to take on all of these. I think we want the students to deal with difficult issues. So some of the scenarios, and it's not all done. We're still working on some of this, but like some of the scenarios that we will put them into are really challenging situations. They're not kind of softballs. They're really tough curveballs. How do you? So you're experiencing anti-Semitism. You witness anti-Semitism. You find yourself in the midst of an anti-Semitic thing on campus. What do you do? So these are the kinds of scenarios that we're going to be talking with the students. So I think we are very interested in taking on the real difficult issues that students are likely to face. And I hope that was kind of what was being asked there. If I got that wrong, maybe one of my other panelists will do better. I think the peacemaker versus standing up for what is right question also, and maybe I'll address that and then leave the others for Noah and Chad. I think that's often a framework that we get asked about. I'll respond to that for me and me alone, but I think reflects some of the principles we talk about, and I'll answer it kind of from my faith tradition. I think about the Savior who engaged with people that disagreed with him vehemently a lot, and what he led with was love and understanding. Never, I don't recall in the scriptures a time where he, because they disagreed, they were all of a sudden evil and they deserved to be, sidelined, but that he engaged with them. He may not agree with them. He held the truth. In fact, I think a lot about President Oakes's teachings where he says, hold the truth even in our outreach to others. Stay anchored in Christ. And I think we can do that while also recognizing that someone disagrees, that recognizing the dignity of that person and their agency to have a different view, but engaging with them in love. So I don't think it's necessarily, and I'm not suggesting you're suggesting this either, but I don't think it's a zero-sum game in that I either have to show love and agree or I need to reject. And I think that for students, it's putting them through scenarios where they can practice that and understand what's the best approach to hold to truth while also showing dignity or showing love to others that I may disagree with on very deeply held convictions. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
I just quickly add, I've had the same question. Paul and I have even talked about that a lot, and I think there could be a false dichotomy, and Paul referred to that it has to be one way or the other. But even if that was your purpose and your view, I can tell you what doesn't work: contention, belittling, not listening, right? So I think there's some principles here that you can apply no matter where your leaning is and what your desires are. But it's not a dichotomy of either this or that. I think these actually go hand in hand better than we sometimes realize. Building on common ground, for example, is a principle that's long been taught to missionaries. I think there's some value to these ideas.
Yeah, and Shonda referenced this as well. One of the other principles, and I go back to President Oakes all the time, is avoid contentious settings. Sometimes, I learned this as a missionary, sometimes it's better not to engage because there's so much contention already. It's not a productive conversation. Maybe reset the framework and engage in a new way.
Noah, did you want to respond to or add any reflections on Shonda's comments that she gave?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm not trained in psychology, but my father's a psychiatrist and I'm Jewish, so I have a certain amount of cultural training that I can draw on. So as you're probably aware, there's this phenomenon called the backfire effect, which is that if I come into a conversation with you and I start with the premise that green Skittles are by far the best tasting Skittles there are, regardless of what you thought about Skittles beforehand, probably even if you never thought about Skittles beforehand, the most likely outcome of our conversation is that you will be convinced that green Skittles are not the best flavor of Skittles that there are. So this is, again, empirically, I keep like saying empiricism because I'm a humanities person through and through. So every time I have like empirical data, I'm like, ooh, yay. So it's been shown in all sorts of areas. If you go into a conversation with a strong conviction, the most likely outcome of that conversation is that the person will walk away more entrenched in whatever opposing belief they had when you entered it, right? One of the things that Ibu Patel, the founder, said to me when I was in college that sort of like blew my mind at the time is he was like, how many arguments have you ever won in your life? And I was like a totally obnoxious 18-year-old who argued with everybody all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never won a single argument. So what's my point? My point is I think when we were doing the Interfaith Community Health Worker training, literally what we taught people, what we trained people is don't say anything about what you think and believe. Just ask other people about what they think and believe and get as curious as you possibly can. Like to the, almost like a pedantic, ridiculous extent. Like, why do you think that? Where have you read about that? Like, where does that come from? Can you think of it? Like, just keep going until you have thoroughly heard the other person out. And then there's this also really interesting psychological phenomenon where if somebody feels truly heard, by and large, they want to extend it back to you. So if you've really heard me out completely, without even realizing it, I have this instinct to be like, well, what do you think? And to try and hear you out as well. And so the best way to put this gets to your question, I think, the best way practically, pragmatically, to get your opinion across is by completely withholding it and allowing other people to solicit it from you. It has the most likely effect of changing hearts and minds. I think there's other stuff that you're getting into about like, don't do this willy-nilly and naively and like and that's all.
Because what you said is actually correct. The thing about that though is that when we hear things that we disagree with, as human beings, we have a hard time maintaining.
Fight and flight.
Because we are triggered. You can see it all over the person's face. So you have to be emotionally aware so that if you're disagreeing, you're not giving that all away because it then disrupts that curiosity.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. The last thing I'll say to your comment, David, I think pluralism and democracy come out of a very pragmatist tradition. And so one of the things we used to teach when we actually did more like on the ground youth interfaith organizing is don't order kosher pizza for the kosher kids who aren't coming. Right? So if you're organizing an interfaith event and none of the groups who are coming happen to keep kosher or halal or whatever, then don't worry about ordering that food, right? Like create the event for the people who are there and make it a positive experience for them. And so, yes, do I want people to learn about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and all sorts of other forms of bigotry? Yes. But if what's existing in the classroom or in the environment is this, let's focus on this and let's learn how to do this and let's have confidence that the research shows that even that experience, like even just bridging with someone from a different Protestant denomination will have these sort of implicit psychological impacts of like, oh, well then maybe other people aren't as bad as I thought they were. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet. There is something I think we need to be careful about with the like, let's go find a Jew or let's go find a Muslim approach. That can get complicated in lots of ways that I'm sure you all can imagine. So I would put a slight caution on that, but otherwise, yeah.
Thanks, Noah. Okay, I think do you have time for one more? We might have just one person respond to the question that comes. So let's come up here, Bryson. We have a question up front.
Thank you, yeah. So each of you spoke a little bit with respect to the ideological challenges of helping the rising generation. And being a BYU student myself and a former seminary student, I found that there's also a couple of logistical barriers, right? Everything from apathy to sort of fear of involvement, especially in that sort of hands-on environment that you talk about this pilot class being. And a lot of times those issues really affect the students that could be most benefited by these programs. And so the question I have for you guys is, what would you say is the best way to mitigate those challenges, and how have you seen in the Interfaith America environment that you've been able to respond to them as well?
We want Chad to respond to that.
So, again, I'm not sure that I have the best answer for that. I love the question. I started by saying that we did all this research with young adults because our numbers were decreasing. In the spirit of also ending on good news, since we've introduced some of these kinds of things, workshops and classes that are more relevant, listening to students, we've actually increased by almost 80,000 Institute students in the last 3 years. Seminary and Institute combined in the last 3 years is as an increase of over 100,000 students. So there's a lot of good news out there. What started with that research was young people who said, I love Institute, but I wouldn't invite my friend because I love studying the book of Isaiah, but my friend's not really all that churchy and they wouldn't be comfortable in Institute. So by creating some of these kinds of experiences that really meet needs, they're more likely to invite their friends and have them come and participate in these things. So I'm trying to hurry looking at the clock, and also this is a tricky question that deserves a lot of time and thought. But I think the more we can create an environment where people feel welcomed, where people feel heard and respected, they'll be more willing to invite their friends, and our reach will be extended to more people to be blessed by these opportunities. But I think with all of this, we're learning. We need to listen. We need to admit that we have a long way to go. And that's one of the questions we need to continue to wrestle with. How do we not just get the audience of people who already feel this way and want this, but the people who need to hear it most, and we'll keep wrestling with that. So thanks for the counsel and your question. It's a really great question.
Let me just, on that point, let me just add something, an actual thing that happened. Elder Clark Gilbert gave a little workshop, I think a 3-session workshop, maybe 6 months ago at the University of Utah. And in his first session, it was about identity and so on. In his first session, he invited, after he had modeled what they were talking about, he invited everyone there to invite a friend. And I don't have real numbers, maybe you remember, Chad, but the attendance, it doubled. So I think that's how we're going to, that's one way. Again, we don't know, but I think one way is we're going to try and help students understand this is something that's meaningful to you. Please go out and tell your friends. They're going to be much more effective in making that invitation than it coming from me or people that look like me. So,
anything to add, Noah?
Well, one of my religious values is not to stand between people and their next meal, so I think...
With that, we will finish it up. Please join me in thanking our panelists.